We're live. Here we are. Little theme song. Not officially a podcast episode, but why not have the theme song from the podcast to start us off? So welcome everyone. Happy Uke Week. We're into Thursday of Uke Week. And I've just come back from the beach. I still have sand in my toes and my really dadly sunglasses. Here's the dad part. Hey! Unbelievable. What a world we live in. I'm joined today by my good friend Samantha Muir, who is an amazing ukulele player, historian, also comes from the guitar world. She's studied with some of the top guitarists and composers in the world. And we just spent a little bit of time together in the UK where she was teaching and performing. I just loved hearing her perform. Such an insightful and incisive way of performing, and the same goes for her take on ukulele history. She also just completed a PhD in ukulele, which is something that I don't believe anyone else has done, and certainly if there are others, there aren't many. So thank you, Sam, for joining us here today and being part of Uke Week. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, we have some folks here. We've got 70 odd people listening right now. And I know they're all here because they are ukulele lovers and love both playing the instrument and learning about the history of the instrument. And today, I promised that we would put on our historian hats and have a dive into the origin story of the ukulele. And so let's get right into it. And along the way, I'm hoping that you might be able to demonstrate some of the sort of early sounds that might have that we might have heard if we were back in 1879, for example. But let's start with this question. How far back do you have to go to really trace the origins of the ukulele? Let's not go all the way back to the Big Bang. Somewhere between sort of now and the Big Bang, there must have been sort of a moment where things geopolitically, economically started to shift toward to put the ukulele on, or to put the machette on a collision course with Hawaii and how it would eventually become the ukulele. What were some of those early sort of tectonic shifts that led us to the ukulele's journey to become the ukulele? Mm-hmm. How far back do we go?
Well, it's quite difficult to go like right back and say, it came from here. And one of the wonderful things about the ukulele is there's not many instruments that you can say, 1879 was like the boom date, the Big Bang date, if you like. But it's pretty clear that the machette came from Portugal and is related to the cavaquinho. And presumably when the Portuguese settled in Madeira 600 years ago, they took their instruments with them, and the machette developed as a local version, if you like, of the cavaquinho. But how that all fits together before then, who knows? Because obviously we can go right back to the four-course guitar, which was prominent in the 16th century, and there's this relationship between that instrument and the modern ukulele, both having four strings, or the four courses of strings, if you like, and the similar tuning, especially if you use the low G. So there's a connection there, but it's not documented, so you can't say. We can hypothesize, but you can't say for sure. But for the machette, one of the earliest depictions of the machette is a portrait, actually, of an English girl, and she was the daughter of one of the British consuls in Madeira. And this portrait is from around 1785 to 98, so it's really early. You can look it up.
Wow.
It's in one of the museums in Funchal in Madeira, and it's Eliza Murray holding this little instrument, and it's got double strings, which is fascinating because it's like a four-course machette. And that would
Right.
seem to
Double
be...
strings like a mandolin, you mean? They were
Yeah,
two by
exactly.
two
Or
by two.
2 by 2 by 2, or the lute idea, or a 12-string guitar. So yeah, pairs of strings. But that's this one image that sits there, but there's not much written about the machette really until the 19th century, and then it's British travellers to the islands, which is really interesting, that write about the instrument. They encounter this tiny guitar, and increasingly it gets mentioned in letters and diaries, and so there is this British influence. And one of my areas of research was to write about that British connection. And again, if you Google the machette, I think it's called A British Perspective, there's an article on some of my findings, and so kind of took it from that angle, if you like, because it was something that obviously being here, especially over lockdown, that I could research in some detail.
That's interesting. I didn't actually. You mentioned some of those sort of letters home from travelers, and when you spoke in the UK just recently, when we were there together, and I'd never heard of those correspondences. The way we might go to South America and see the cuatro and be fascinated by that and write home, and that becomes the paper trail for future historians, not so much the local knowledge, because it's to some degree sort of taken for granted where it is. It's more tourists end up sort of actually accidentally sort of documenting for future generations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the earliest writings about the machette is by Robert White, and he's writing a guidebook with information for invalids and tourists.
Wow.
And he pops in this paragraph on the machette, and it's kind of like, what's that doing in this guidebook that's for invalids?
Right.
Because you have to also realise that at this time, TB and consumption are pretty serious in the UK, and so Madeira was seen as being very therapeutic because of the climate and the clean air. I mean, in the 1850s in London, there was the Great Stink. Because the air was just so rife, because there was so much effluent and pollution on the banks of the Thames and in the Thames, that they just called it the Great Stink. The Great Stink. And they even, thought about moving Parliament somewhere else, because it was just like, why do we have to put up with this? So then someone said, well, hang on, maybe this is a good reason to clean up the Thames, which is what they did. So, the clean air of Madeira and the warmer climate, it was seen as being really therapeutic for British, travellers and also invalids.
And so was I haven't read this guidebook, advice, but would it be similar to today's kind of like, take a mental health break, learn a new instrument, bring some joy into your life, would it have been similar kind of almost like self-help sort of advice, and learn the ukulele, it'll bring you joy, that kind of thing?
I guess it was, in a way. It was just like something you could do on the island, and like by the 1870s, the guidebooks are actually telling people where they can buy a machette and who they can have lessons from, and how much it's going to cost. So you can go and buy a machette in the fancy bazaar, and then you have lesson with whoever for 600 reais an hour or something. And so it's being advertised as something that tourists can do, and the influence is really evident in some of the arrangements for the machette as well.
Well, tell me, and the rest of the folks here a little bit more about the machette. I mean, I've heard machette, I've heard bragina, I've heard rajao. These are some of the ancestors of the instrument, but it seems to come back in the more folks I talk to more recently. The machette is sort of the big one. What are the differences between these sort of proto ukuleles, and how do we land on the machette as sort of the direct ancestor?
Yeah, that's a great question. The machette is the term that was used in the 19th century and before. In the 20th century, it became known as Brigigna. And I think
Mm,
possibly that's because the full name is Machette de Braga. So Braga, Brigigna, you can kind of see that connection.
mm,
Um, and that instrument is still played in Madeira, as is the machette, but the machette is seen as this more kind of refined instrument from the 19th century. And I've got a modern Brigigna. I should have brought that in as well. I've only got the machette, but
mm.
it just looks like a ukulele. I don't mean just, but it could easily be a ukulele. Whereas the machette is, hopefully you can see it. It's
Yeah.
very the lines, it's very delicate.
Yes.
um and it's got this
That's
lovely
beautiful.
little, sorry about the strap, that's a bit messy, isn't it?
It's,
But
is that a conventional like headstock shape? I mean, it has a sort
they
of scroll look to it.
yeah, it's kind of a slipper um
Oh, I see.
shape, but they used figure of eight shape as well,
Right.
and so there were different shapes. But yeah,
Mm, yeah.
this machette was made in Funchal by the main machette maker there, and you can see it's got this beautiful little inlay here, which is very
Yeah.
typical. And you see this sort of thing on the early Martins as well.
Mm, right. And this shape too is very sort of like very thin waisted and quite top heavy too. Like it's very figure of eight. Like
Yeah,
very literally figure of eight.
yeah,
Which is a little unlike what we eventually see with the ukulele, some decades later. But I mean,
yeah.
some of the early Joseph Kumalai, ukes would have had they'd be modeling directly off of that. But that still doesn't quite look like an ukulele, does it? Like it's
No, not quite. But then if you look at the very first ukuleles made in Hawaii, and
mhm,
it's worth pointing out that the makers Nunes and Diaz, they advertised machettes in
mm,
1884 in
mm,
Hawaii. So I gather from that before they were making ukuleles, they were making the Madeiran instruments.
right, right,
And if you look at these really early instruments, and Sean Iacovoni's got a fantastic site, Ukulele Friend. He's got
mm,
some collector's instruments on there, so you can look at them, and then you compare the machettes that he's got to those early ukuleles by Diaz Santo and Nunes, and I sometimes say to him when he posts on Facebook, well, what's the difference between
mm,
these first ukuleles and the machette? They're very similar. Um,
yeah,
but because when they go into the mass production, then they get rid of this. They don't need this much fingerboard, so it's 12 frets.
yes.
And it's just a bit different. The shape's different.
Right, and and being separated by a couple of oceans over time, the designs start to diverge. I imagine that separation was sort of key to the evolution of it.
Yeah,
Just the way that
absolutely.
languages evolve differently on one side of a mountain or the other, and they're not actually that far away, but because there's so little communication, they do evolve in their own ways over time, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, the wood,
we
because sorry, the
no, go
in
ahead.
Hawaii they had koa, so they used koa. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
there's that connection to the Hawaiian royal family, but also that was
Mm,
a wood that was accessible and was obviously a good tone wood, whereas this
mm,
is spruce and I'm not sure, but the authentic, like in the 19th century, they were using a wood called till.
mm,
So they would have made the instruments with, I guess, whatever wood was at hand, and that was something that developed in Hawaii, was the use
yeah.
of koa. Um,
Yeah, and that's John King and Jim Tranquatta have an interesting part of their book that centers around the political sort of symbolism of Koa at that time. There we go. There's the book right there.
It's
Hey,
yeah, pride of
that's the
place.
one. Yes, absolutely. It's the real thing. We
Yeah.
let's go into that in a minute. But we've got 110 people here, and I'm sure they're wondering what I'm wondering, which is, what does it sound like?
What does it sound like? Yeah, this is a really good point because you also asked me about the Rajal, and and let me just get myself. Shall I just lower that so you can see?
Sure, sure.
How's that? So if you the tuning,
Hmm.
so it's D G B D.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Like, and just for comparison, I have my ukulele here, which is
yep, yep. So
quite different, isn't it?
this is higher, quite different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
It's very
Interesting.
different. So that's the traditional Madeiran Machette tuning.
Mm.
And the ukulele gets its tuning from the rajau, which is the instrument with 5 single strings, that
Mm.
in Hawaii was first called the tarapatch. Okay, the
Right.
tarapatch is a bit of a confusing instrument because later it becomes that doubled string instrument. But
Hmm.
the original tarapatch in Hawaii was actually the Madeiran rajau. And
Oh.
if you've got this book at home,
Hmm.
which is, it is the book on
Hmm.
ukulele history, and you look at the photographs on the front, you can see that these two Hawaiian ladies, they're holding instruments with 5
Peg
pegs.
holes,
Yep.
but are there
But
actually 5 strings?
they've removed the 5th one.
Right.
So basically, they've got, like, I guess, concert-sized ukuleles. And
Right.
I guess these are from about the 1890s.
Yeah.
Um, so it was quite common, and apparently quite common in Madeira as well, to remove that 5th string just to make life easier.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Should I play something?
I would love that.
See what
Please.
So what I'll do, sorry, I'll just explain. I'm going to play for you a piece by the Madeiran composer Candido Drummond, and this is from a handwritten manuscript dated 1846, and there's I think there's something like 42. I can't remember the exact number, 42 or something pieces in it, and the majority are in the form of European ballroom dances, so which was the
Hmm.
fashionable music of the time. So I'll play a little bolero.
Great. Ah, that's beautiful.
And it
And
has
so stylish. You can just imagine that, like, the
it's
style of the times, right? It's very evocative.
absolutely, and it has the
Mm.
guitar accompaniment. So in Cheltenham
Mm.
and in the forest, because I had Jeff Peterson playing the guitar accompaniments, which I mean
Yes.
they're very simple accompaniments. They're basically everything's in G with a few D and C chords.
Why not, right?
um, but they sound great. They're such fun to play,
Hmm.
really.
And just on that, I hear elements there of, Ernest Kai and what he must have been, what must have made an impression on him. The campanella effects that are there, the sort of waltz-like quality, and the lightness of the music. I mean, that must have been a
Absolutely.
huge influence on this like him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it drives me nuts because I think Kai must have heard this music, but there's
Yes.
nothing documented to prove it. So,
Right.
you look at some of his waltzes and those pieces from the method, particularly the 1916 method,
Mm.
and they're great pieces, and little fingerstyle pieces with campanellas and chords,
Hmm.
quite simple in structure, but also, similar to this, and I just think, I'd so love to know what music the Madeirans were actually playing when they brought their instruments to
Yes.
Hawaii, and what did the Hawaiians hear first of all?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question to me because, we've all, those of us who have dived into ukulele history to any degree will know about this sort of the story of, possibly Joao Fernandez, jumping off the boat on, in 1879, August 23rd, and sort of this myth of him jumping off the boat and strumming the ukulele and maybe singing something. We don't know what style, but that sort of represented the first time that kind of reverberation had even touched the Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah.
But there's something about that I can't sort of reconcile. I don't imagine him jumping off the boat and playing what you just played. I imagine, right? I imagine him jumping off the boat and singing, like jambalaya or wagon wheel, or something that is much more of a sort of a folk song, something that would have brought him joy, and and been a sort of almost like an offering of thanks, really, a very joyful thing, and yet a lot of the Machette repertoire is this much more, to our ears now, such a much more refined and delicate and almost parlor music, in the sense that it was stylish and sweet. And how do you reconcile those two things? There must have been multiple styles that were being played around that time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's until this repertoire by Candida Drummond was discovered or rediscovered, if you like, in the 1990s. By a Portuguese academic, Manuel Moraes. He put it into a book, which is fantastic to have it. But the up until that point, the machette was just thought of as, well, I don't mean just, but it was only thought of as being a folk instrument. It wasn't considered this classical instrument with a repertoire. And then suddenly, overnight, it had one, a small repertoire. But that music was being played in the rooms and the halls. They probably didn't have any concert halls. It would have just been people's houses. And from what I've read, they definitely liked, the wealthy people in Madeira definitely liked to have parties. And there'd be 2 or 3 a night in the season.
Right.
And I found reference to Candido Drummond and Manuel Cabral playing music at these parties. Was it dance to, or was it incidental music? I don't know for sure. But I've talked to like experts on the quadrille, and they think just the nature of the music, the rhythmic flow, the kind of punchiness of the machette, and then the fullness of the guitar accompaniment. It's like, why not? It could have easily been danced to.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
it feels like it was, although it's always hard to say because so much classical music, so much concert music ends up being influenced by dance music. You think of the Bach partitas, for example, that are all named after dances, but nobody actually dances to them. So it is hard to say. But you just, when you hear you play that, even that sample that you played, it really feels like it could have been true dance music, true party music of the time. And I often say to students and teachers, well, especially younger students, to try to connect with them a little bit. I'll say, this ukulele contains more songs than all the iPods in the world put together. Or I could say now, this ukulele has more songs than Spotify, and they sort of go, no, that's not true. And I said, well, it really is, because, on some level, if I had enough time, I could play them all on this little thing. And I wonder what you think of, the idea that, if you were going to go embark on a 4-month-long boat ride, and you could bring one thing to entertain yourself, and you couldn't bring your iPad, and you couldn't bring your Nintendo Switch, and you couldn't bring, your iPhone or whatever, wouldn't this be the thing that you would grab?
Yeah,
because it has all the songs in it,
Yeah.
It was the ultimate sort of storage device for music at that
Yeah.
time, and it was so portable. I think
Exactly.
the one that you're holding, and this is a soprano scale. I think
Hmm.
the one you're holding is probably even smaller than this, right?
I
I
think
mean,
so. Yeah.
even more
Yeah.
portable than
Yeah.
what we think of as the
Yeah.
smallest ukuleles now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
actually, there's quite an interesting reference in Captain's Courageous by it's there, wait for it. But the hero of the story is a Portuguese fisherman, and his name is Manuel, and he saves well, the spoiled hero. And at some point, Manuel whips out they call it a Machette, from behind the gunnel or whatever, and he breaks into song, and it's got wire strings on it. So that's quite a good indication that we have, this kind of gut strung, more refined instrument, and then you have the wire strung instrument that would have been played by, you know, the common people, if you like, who couldn't afford the
right,
fancy gut
interesting.
strings.
Yeah, because gut would have been very expensive and hard to come by.
Yeah, absolutely,
Mm, mm,
absolutely. Um,
yeah, that's amazing. I just want to say to those who are, oh, Gary chimes in with Kipling.
Thank you. That was the name
Thank you,
I
Gary.
was. Perfect.
Yeah, and it would have to be Gary. Thank you. Thanks for bailing us out on that one.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Folks who are, we've got even more folks now in the room here. 113 people listening. Think ahead, because there will be a Q&A time coming up fairly soon. And I just, if you have questions or things that you want to ask Sam, this is such a golden opportunity. So don't be shy about starting to formulate those questions and getting ready to drop them in the chat. Sam, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the sort of, not to be a downer, but the darker side of the ukulele's history, because the instrument itself is such a ray of sunshine for all of us, and it's one of the reasons we're drawn to it. But the fact that it exists came out of quite a bit of hardship, which forced migrations, which forced people to seek a better life. I mean, there is a sort of a darker thread to the story, and I wondered if you could just speak about that side of things a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really true. That was an area that kind of interested me. It was like, why would people living in Madeira, Portuguese people, want to go to Hawaii, which is a massive, upheaval for people culturally, the language and everything. I kind of just thought back because my parents emigrated to Australia when I was 7. And that was a big upheaval for my family, but it was because my parents wanted a better way of life, and my dad had been made redundant, and he just said, right, we're going to Australia, I want my kids to grow up in a better place, and off we went. That was a big upheaval. So I was thinking, wow, to go from Madeira to Hawaii, why would people do that, en masse in a big way? So I spent a lot of time reading the guidebooks for the invalids and whatever, but also, and gleaned from that, that not only was this, an island very popular with tourists, invalid tourists, or just tourists who wanted to, walk around in a beautiful place. The darker side is that during the 19th century, there was like one economic catastrophe followed another. And it just brought so much hardship on the people that even as early as the 1830s, people were leaving because they were destitute and desperate. And part of that is because of the wine industry, which had been so lucrative for so many centuries in Madeira. And the vines were hit by disease, and it happened twice. And that really dented the wine industry. So they went from having like 70 merchants, foreign British merchants basically on the island, to only having 15, and the wine crop, the grapes were just completely decimated. So there was unemployment and poverty, and then there was a cholera epidemic in the 1850s, which wiped out approximately 10% of the population. So there's this extraordinary hardship and suffering. And as I said, many of the wine merchants left. The Phelps family, who had a strong connection to the Machette and Candido Drummond, they stuck it out till the 1860s. And in the letters that particularly Elizabeth Phelps writes, she talks of the hardship and the suffering and what the family was doing to try and help. And at that time, the elder daughter, Bella Phelps, she launched the Madeira lace industry, and she was getting the women of the area to create these beautiful works of lace, and then she was paying them. Her uncle and father were actually giving her the money to pay these women, and then they took this lace to London and sold it. So it's quite a business venture for her, which is interesting in itself, I think. And apparently that helped a great deal in their particular area, but of course it wasn't across the whole island. So that kind of gives you an insight into the hardship, and then you see that these people went to Hawaii. They were seeking a better way of life, and they went with their families, and it was it was hard, a lot of hardship for people. So I think whenever I play this music, it sounds so happy and full of joy, and you imagine these people having these lovely balls in their beautiful elegant dresses and whatever. But these are the wealthy people, the Brits, and other foreign merchants, and also the wealthy Portuguese. They're having a pretty good time while the people are starving, and it's just it kind of it hits you. And so
there's a real bittersweetness to the music.
Yeah, exactly. But Candido Drummond and his guitarist partner, Manuel Cabral, they obviously were able to make a living out of their music. I'm not quite sure how, because at one point Elizabeth Phelps, in her letter to her husband, says that these two fellows have been coming to teach Clara the machette and Harriet the guitar, and she says, should they not be paid somehow?
Oh.
I was like, well, why?
Hey, some things never change, right?
Some things never change. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe they were. I kind of thought, but then perhaps because they were getting all these gigs, if you like, at parties, maybe that was for them that was it was worth doing the lessons connected to this family, right. And then they would get the recommendation. But it still it sucks a bit, doesn't it? Really.
That's the quote from Samantha Muir. It sucks a bit.
It sucks a bit.
Being a musician in the 19th century sucks a bit. Speaking of which, though, no, that's right. Speaking of which, a few people have said, how about we hear another sample from the Machette? Do you have another tune that you could play for us? Another sample?
I do. I have the Clara polka, and I just mentioned the Phelps family, and Clara Phelps, as I said before, was studying with the Machette, with Candido Drummond. And she left Madeira when she married in 1860. She married a clergyman. But she took her machette, or brought her machette to England with her, and continued to play in amateur concerts. So I'm going to play the Clara polka. I can't say for sure that this piece was written for her, but I like to think it was.
Yeah, nice. Oh no. Did we lose Sam? I was being just swept away by that beautiful, beautiful melody, and then I think we lost the connection. Well, Sam will be back. Um, yes. Okay. If you can hear me, why don't you put up your hand or give me a signal in the chat, and we'll see if we can get Sam back on the line here. Yeah, she said she had. Okay, great.
I'm back.
There she is.
Sorry.
Hi.
Did you hear any of that?
Yes, we heard,
Okay.
but
Sorry
you
about
left
that.
us hanging. I didn't quite hear this, like the final cadence, so I feel like it's
Oh,
like Machette interrupt us.
sorry
Yeah,
about that. Yeah.
that's okay. And such a beautiful sound, and so delicate, and just just a lovely sound. It's hard to say. I mean, if that's the kind of music that I would play for my own enjoyment. It creates this beautiful sort of small bubble of
Hmm.
sound. When I play at home, I often play, my little, you know,
Yep.
little
Love that piece.
little pieces. I love
Yep.
that. That's one of my favorites of all
Yep.
time. I learned that from John King, Hone Akavai by Ernest Kai, who we mentioned earlier. But or I'll play little jazz numbers that create sort of a little bubble around me. They're not so much for. I don't feel there's so much sort of big stage uh, pieces. And yet this music seems to exist sort of in both worlds. Sort of was there. I mean, you mentioned before that maybe they didn't have the same concept of like concert hall
Mm.
music. So maybe there wasn't a big distinction between sort of very personal music and then very sort of public music. Do you think there was that same kind of distinction that we have now, sort of what you play for yourself for your own enjoyment, and then you go to see AC/DC, that's very public music. Was there that same kind of dichotomy or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to some extent, because there's definitely mention of there's a Philharmonic Society of Funchal, and they put on concerts every month.
Hmm.
Okay, so the foreign tourists go and they see the Machette played there. That would be quite a different setting from seeing Candido Drummond and Manuel Cabral playing in a, in a for a ball, a private ball.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but would the music be different? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
wonder if
really
it
know.
would.
It's not.
I wonder
We
if it
don't
would
have
be
programs,
different,
so.
or if it would be just louder. Like I'm always curious about what the environment does to the composition. And anyway, things we can't really know, but
Mm.
we'll always sort of wonder about. Um, well, Sam, this is just fascinating for anybody who's captivated by the ukulele is at some point going to become interested in where it came from and how it ended up, in my hands, in my life, filling my life with joy. So tracing it back to the origins of the instruments, it's just a natural thing to want to find out more about where this sort of ray of sunshine came from.
Yeah.
And this is just so fascinating. I wonder if in the last few minutes that we have together, if there are some questions from the chat here that we could tackle together. Now would
Sure.
be a good time. If you do have a question, I'm looking at the chat here. We've hit 121 people now listening. And if you have any questions, now would be a good time. So please type away, and I'll forward your questions to Sam here. Avon from New Zealand is asking, please explain the five strings some more. What is when was it five? When did it become four? Why did it become four? Was it really that hard with five? What's this whole five string, four string thing about?
Okay. So in Madeira, in the 19th century, late 19th century, there's a five single string instrument called a rajau, and then there's the Machette. And the Rajau is still played today, so you can look up some of the Madeiran musicians, and you'll often see the Rajau and the Machette being played together in ensemble. And the Machette tends to take the melody part because it just makes sense because it's quite high and pingy. Whereas the Rajau, I mean, it can also be melodic, but it's used more for chords. So that's a 5-string instrument, and that's definitely was in Hawaii because, as I say, it was called the tarapatch, and it had 5 single strings. At some point, the tarapatch, this is in the 19 teens, became an 8-string instrument. So, but 4 pairs of strings. Okay, so it didn't have that. It wasn't, a 5-string. It was a 4-string instrument, but double, and with a larger body. And then in the 1920s, Martin just phased that out and replaced it with the concert ukulele. Because what completely blew my mind that I didn't know about till quite recently is that not only did they make a tarapatch guitar / ukulele with 8 strings, they also made it with 4 single strings. And I was like, well, what's the difference between that and a ukulele? And it was size. So basically that, it's not a linear progression. Someone said to me, don't think of it as a linear progression. I think there's kind of it's a bit messy, isn't it? History, really. It's, toing and froing, and, people having, different ideas, trying different things.
And what sticks isn't always what you might predict.
Exactly, yeah.
But I've never played the 5-string. I've never played the Rajau. Or I can imagine that there is a certain logic to, like, I have 4 fingers. It feels good to play 4 strings, especially if I want to play melodically, like you say. It's impossible to say, but the 4 strings, 4 fingers does make a certain amount of sense.
It makes sense
if you're going to make an instrument, for the people. That does make sense.
Yeah, it's very accessible. And the Rajau has 2 re-entrant strings, which is, it's a D, so it's D, G, C, E, A. And so the D and the G are both re-entrant, and that's really challenging.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Does that mean you don't always play both re-entrant strings? Somehow you're avoiding one, or because you can't. Well, I mean, you can with a bar fret all 5 at the same time, but I can see how it would have been a little less user friendly.
Yeah, I think it's more chordal. I mean, I have a Rajau, and actually I arranged a Vivaldi sonata for it because there's not the repertoire like the Machette. So, but yes, it's still very popular in Madeira and played a bit like a ukulele, but just with an extra string.
Right. Interesting. Okay, great. Susanna is asking about that repertoire book that you mentioned. Was that the Drummond book?
Yeah.
Is it actually available?
Well, I'm just looking around to see if I've got it. It is. It's really hard to get hold of. Maybe if I send you the details.
Yeah,
you could.
We could get the word out on
Yeah.
Metropolis or in a follow-up email or something.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Because it took me about 3 months to get hold of it.
Oh, wow.
Quite
so if anybody from Hal Leonard or Mel Bay are listening, this is an opportunity. Publish that thing.
But I do have, I've made my own transcriptions, if you like, from that book. And also I've got a copy of the original, which I was sent from Madeira when I was working on some of the pieces. So I do have some, like the pieces I played tonight. If people are interested, they can just email me.
Yeah, and email you through your website, which is samanthamuir.com.
Yeah, or I Love Classical Ukulele. So there's 2 sites.
Ooh, okay. I Love Classical Ukulele.com.
Yep.
Okay, good one. I love a good URL. Okay, another question. Kate says, you mentioned the Martin Company. Where was it based at the time, and why did it build the uke? Why did Martin get into the ukulele game?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess because I mean, this is not my area of expertise. It's kind of beyond my parameters. But I think they dabbled quite early on in the 1900s, but they tried to build them like guitars using the same
Mm.
kind of system of strutting, but smaller, and they didn't sound very good. And then I think they kind of looked into it a bit more, had some help from Nunez, certainly for the
Mm.
Tarapatch.
Wow.
And then I suppose after 1915, there's this explosion of interest in the ukulele.
Yeah.
After that,
After the Pan
the
Pacific
Pan
exhibition.
Pacific exhibition, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess it was just like, oh, there's money to be made here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that I wasn't aware that there was contact between Nunes and Martin, but I certainly have experienced that in my own life where when guitar builders apply guitar principles directly to the ukulele without any kind of translation or sort of making allowances, the instruments tend to not come out great at first, and they have to really adjust their building practices to really build ukuleles, not small guitars. And so I can
Hmm.
only imagine that's exactly what Martin found back in the day. So that's interesting in
Yeah.
itself.
But it's
Um,
like I said, I think the John King and Tom Walsh wrote a book
mhm.
about the Martin ukulele, and I don't have that to hand. It's in the house actually, but yeah, that's a great book as well. I mean, we don't have a lot of resources on the history of the uke, so there's a couple of really good things out there worth reading.
Yeah, yeah, the Tom Walsh book. I don't have a copy, but I've seen it. It's amazing. It's a labor of love, and it's certainly the go-to
Yep.
um, on the history there of Martin. Um, Jolt is asking about the wood. Speaking of building ukuleles, I know Jolt is getting into the business of building them himself. He says, I'm interested in the wood choice. He says, today the ukulele is sort of a liberal instrument in regards to manufacturing methods and materials, but was it more stringent back in the day? Was there ever a time when it was like, thou shalt build ukuleles this way with these woods, or was it always fairly sort of open-ended, do you think?
Well, I think you need Aaron Kime to discuss that because he's
Mm,
researched those early instruments.
mhm.
But I think basically the bakers would have used what was to hand, wouldn't they? And
Yeah.
what they
What
could
was,
source at a
yeah.
reasonable price, and that's
Mhm.
why koa, obviously in Hawaii, was
Well,
the
and to go back
go-to.
to that point that we just glanced off of, half an hour ago, the koa sort of the use of koa to make ukuleles is such a fascinating topic. Jim and John talk about this in their book,
Yeah.
where they sort of seem to be saying that the use of koa was not so much an acoustic choice, but sort of a political choice. At the time of the annexation of Hawaii by the United States, it became fashionable to sort of show your pride and your sort of patriotism for the Hawaiian monarchy in
Yeah.
sort of a subtle and also not so subtle way by buying things that were made out of koa that
Mm.
represented the monarchy.
Yeah.
And so you would have picture frames and tables and chairs and everything in your home if you could afford it to show your support for the
Yeah.
monarchy at that time of annexation. And then the instrument builders who were also plugged into the cabinet building world and
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
furniture building world, they often came from there. They sort of tapped into that and say, well, let's do that with ukuleles. And whether or not uh, building out of koa was an acoustic choice or not to me is a fascinating question, because it just so happens to be a beautiful looking wood that actually sounds great. But whether that was the purpose, or whether that was the motivation or not,
Right.
they really opened my eyes to the possibility that there were other factors involved when choosing koa as a tone
Yeah,
wood.
absolutely. I mean, maybe there's just some grand design at work.
Yeah, for ukulele. That's right. And
Um,
ukulele proves it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
I
funny.
need to my MacBook's about to go flat, so I need to unplug my microphone and plug my
Yes, okay. I'll go get one more
so
question while you do that.
Okay.
Boom. Okay. Here we go. I'm hearing a little like echo effect. Are you still,
Um,
are you on,
can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you, but I can also hear me.
Ah,
Maybe you just
so
turn down your speaker a little bit,
maybe if I hang on, just let me
or use your headphones even better.
hang on. I'm just all tangled up.
That happens.
Okay.
Okay, just looking at the questions again here.
Okay, so I can hear you
Okay,
through my
hello.
headphones. Yep.
Yep, and we
Can
can hear you, and that's
Okay.
all great. No more echo. Great. Ah,
Perfect.
what a world. Um, okay. Okay, got some good questions here. I'm not sure we're going to get to them all. Um, Let me see. Speaking of those, the gut strings that you talked about before, um, uh, Tilam says, would it be interesting to put natural gut strings on a modern ukulele, or does it only make sense to use gut strings on like antique old ukuleles? And if so, how would you source gut strings today?
Aquila make a gut string
Mhm.
for the ukulele, so you can look it up on their website. And I think they're made out of, I think they're cow's gut.
I was going to say sheep, but yeah, it's
They're,
not cat.
no,
I can tell you that much.
it's definitely not cat. But I think these are cow. They're a little bit rough.
Mm,
But you can, yeah, they have a very reasonably priced gut strings, because you can spend a lot of money if you go
yeah,
to like a violin shop or something, and um, yeah,
yeah. And if you go to a violin shop, they wouldn't necessarily know how it would play on the uke, but Aquila does.
yeah,
They totally understand that
exactly,
world.
yeah,
They're making modern strings, as well as I've been to the factory and they have a whole section that's just the gut strings. It's amazing. Having them sort of stretched and drying, and wow, it's pretty special to have folks still manufacturing gut strings
yeah,
for the
yeah.
ukulele. So that's definitely the place to go.
That's the place to go, because you get the right, the right gauge and everything. Otherwise,
Exactly.
working out the gauge is really tricky. So
Yeah,
that's what I would recommend. Yeah.
cool. Brother Sam also says, doesn't Salvarez make gut strings for ukulele? That I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, not sure.
Um, and Sam was also asking about, Brother Sam, not Sam Muir. Sam was asking, do you know anything about the history of an ukulele company named Kahala? Does that name ring a bell at all? Kahala? No,
Nope.
me neither.
No.
There are so many ukulele companies that start with the letter K. You could write a whole book, I think. Right? So it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to.
I think Jim Trancata or Sean Iacovoni, they might have some insight
Yes.
there. Yeah.
And Sean, you can find Sean at Ukulele Friend. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got just the most amazing collection of um, historical instruments and modern instruments as well. But yeah, um, okay. Look, this has been really wonderful and fun, and I wonder if, to wrap things up, if there's anything that is especially dear to your heart in terms of looking at ukulele history that we sort of haven't touched on. Are there some sort of tidbits or sort of like favorites in your world that you just wanted to throw out there to wrap things up?
Yeah, I think, well, we kind of touched on it a bit, because you mentioned Ernest Kai, but I'm very interested in like the really early ukulele methods and the
Mm,
different approaches that people were using. So we're talking, before Roy Smeck, and then George Formby get going with
yeah.
all the, fancy strumming. And it's really interesting to see what people were doing and what they were playing on the ukulele. And I think that's really insightful. The Ernest Kai pieces, obviously, we talked about and you demonstrated, and you can see how they're really nice little fingerstyle pieces. But there's other, one of my personal favorites is Jenny Durkee, who invented the felt pick. Around 1916, 1917, and she was a guitarist, an eminent guitarist, classical guitarist, and she also played mandolin and banjo and demonstrated instruments. And she went from, like, she couldn't look at a ukulele to becoming a ukulele fiend, but only when played in her way, which she called the American way of playing the ukulele.
Interesting.
And she played with a felt pick, and, like, I guess it's mandolin style, that kind of tremolo, back and
Right.
forth, really fast. But her arrangements were very classical, Bach and Mozart and whoever. So that, I think, is quite fascinating. It's quite interesting how quirky the ukulele was in its early
Always
days.
was.
And then, it still is, because, with people doing lots of different things and different styles, and I really like how that's, happening more now. We're not just seeing it as this, oh, you have to strum the ukulele and do the fancy strokes, which are great, but it's only one side of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an interesting way to sort of wrap this up, because what you're kind of saying is, like, we're still not very much different to the way things were in 1917, or
Yeah.
or even earlier, in terms of our real understanding of sort of how to play it and how to write for it and what it even is. The instrument itself is just so young,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And
I mean,
it's great.
on the scheme of things,
Yeah.
we are not much further ahead. When you think of sort of like the Big Bang, we're still only sort of a fraction of a second after, as the universe is forming. That's still where we're at with the
Yeah.
ukulele, and that. I mean, personally, for me, when I look back at my own journey with the instrument, and when I think about why I stuck with it as a teenager and as a 20-something, it was because it was so unfinished, as an instrument, and the the creative possibilities were so
Yeah.
tantalizing,
Yeah.
and so I love these stories that people inventing the American way or the such and such way,
Yeah.
because that's essentially what we're still doing today, right?
Yeah.
To a large degree, most performers are innovating their own styles of playing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it just shows you how early on we are in the history of the instrument.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Unfinished and unfettered as well. So we're not, kind of dragged down by all these historical kind of expectations, which is nice.
Yes, it's so nice. I mean, it's so refreshing, and there's so much left to be done and left to be said, which I
Yeah,
think is
absolutely.
part of what, certainly part of what keeps me coming back for more. So,
Yeah.
well, look, Sam, this has been so much fun. Thank you for spending some time with us today as part of Uke Week. And how can people learn more about you and follow you?
Okay, so I've got a YouTube channel which is Sam Muir Ukulele. So you can see my recordings on there, videos. I'm also on Patreon. I've got a Patreon channel. I'm on Facebook, and I Love Classical Ukulele is the main ukulele site, which, as you pointed out, needs updating.
Yes, because you're no longer doing a PhD.
I
You have completed a
done,
PhD. We just have to
Yep.
change the tense
I
in
do,
that
yeah.
sentence.
Um,
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
great.
social media I'm on.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Sam. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking the time with us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. 120 some odd people, and for those of you listening now or tuning in later, happy Uke Week. Don't forget that tomorrow is the big day. It's the 23rd of August, and the Ukulele will be 145 years old. At least it was 145 years since the Ravenscrag docked in Hawaii. We know that moment, the spiritual birth of the ukulele. So we are celebrating tomorrow, 145 years young, the ukulele, and we will do that at this same time, actually. But tomorrow it will be a toast to the ukulele. Bring your ukulele. We're going to play a happy birthday to the ukulele. It will be a relatively short session, but it's such a nice way to celebrate our favorite instrument and to all be together one more time in during Uke Week. Uke Week doesn't finish tomorrow. There is one more session for ukulele teachers or anyone who is interested in ukulele teaching. We talked quite a bit about pedagogy here in this chat. And so on Saturday, we also have one final Uke Week session, and that is for all teachers are welcome to join our regular JHUI live session, which is normally just for students and teachers in the JHUI teacher certification program. But in honor of Uke Week, we're making it an open house, so anybody can join on Saturday as well, and that will be the official closing of this year's Uke Week celebrations. But don't be a stranger tomorrow. Please show up and help us toast to our favorite instrument. Samantha, thank you so much for being part of this. It's
Pleasure.
been
Thank
a real
you.
pleasure, and
Thanks so much.
I look forward to chatting again soon.
Yep. Okay then.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks so
James.
much. Bye for
Bye.
now.
Bye.